Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another episode review from the Haunting Hour television series. And this episode comes from the final season. In fact, it is the final episode of the whole show. It was directed by James Head and written by Dan Angel and Billy Brown. And the episode is called Goodwill Towards Men. And since I don't have a DVD with a copy of the episode on it, I'm going to be overlaying an image here for the remainder of the video. So Goodwill Towards Men was the final episode of the entire Haunting Hour show that was actually canceled prematurely. This was never intended to be the final episode, from what I gather. What happened was the Hub Network was acquired by Discovery around the early 2010s. Because the Haunting Hour television show did not fit the programming block they had in mind for the network, the show was swiftly canceled. Now, I don't know if there was unaired episodes associated with the show. I couldn't tell you that, or anything due to lost media. I'm sure there is some possibly out there, but what I do know is there was an episode lineup prepared for a following season that had, I think, one or two sequel episodes to some fan favorite episodes. So they did have a lot of steam left in the tank, and this show ended way before it needed to. Even though I will say this, Season 4 is not my favorite season of the show. I mentioned this in the past. When I got onto the Haunting Hour show in high school, I pretty much DVR'd the entire series. I think even up through Season 4, but I never really watched the Season 4 episodes because I started to notice a dip in quality, unfortunately. Now, this episode, despite it being a Season 4 episode, I don't think is a dip in quality per se, because let's face it, I think the episode, for the most part, kind of fits the Haunting Hour show in a lot of ways for me. There's a lot of missed opportunities in this episode. There's a couple of rushed bits, some stale moments to it. But nonetheless, it's still a great story for what it's trying to be. Well, I'm going to say great, but still a pretty good story to recommend to you all. Now, what's funny to me, before we get into the plot overview, is that this episode is a Christmas-themed episode, and way back in Season 1, A Creature Was Stirring, which was Episode 3 overall, pretty much kicked off the show after Really You, which was, I think, a preview pilot that was pitched on the Hub before the show got picked up. It's kind of like the Haunted Mask. The Really You is like the Haunted Mask from the Goosebumps show of the Haunting Hour show. Creature Was Stirring really started off this Haunting Hour television series. And the fact that it began on a Christmas episode and ended on a Christmas episode is kind of hilarious to me. And they're both written by Dan Angel and Billy Brown. Go figure. But yeah, like I said, I definitely recommend you go check this out. For those of you watching in episode order, I could definitely see your frustrations if you end on this episode and there's no more after. I totally get that. But I will say this. If you watch the show in its completion, go read the short story collections from the Haunting Hour and Nightmare Hour to get some more stories that they never adapted or something like that. Without further ado, let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So the story starts off a little bit atypically for this show. You pretty much get thrown into the action of it before the credits start rolling. And we meet this girl named Missy. And Missy is observing her two gardeners outside. And she's put a lot of thought into the holiday season for the Christmas time of year to try to give them something as a gift. And when she goes downstairs to ask her parents if they're going to do anything for the gardeners outside, her parents, who are rich snobs, kind of laugh at the idea and says, we give them a present and that's a job. And you can tell off the bat that Missy's parents and even her older brother, who chimes in, are unlikable pricks who look down upon non-rich people. And Missy is taken back by this behavior, and she decides to go out of her own way to make something nice for the gardener and his son that works with him. So when the son comes inside, she decides to give him some cookies she made or something like that. And the kid's very thankful. But in doing so, this behavior of Missy giving the gardeners, present, made the dad want to fire the gardener and his son because they're getting too close to the family. And this is a tradition. Whenever the workers get too close, they let them go. And Missy is really upset by this. And before she knows it, she's visited by the gardener's son, who brings her an angel that he was given on the streets somewhere. And he said he wants her to have it. So she gladly accepts, and she opens the box and she sees the angel and she loves it. She thinks it's beautiful. And then her family scolds her again about taking a gift. And they're like, what are you going to do with that? And she's like, well, I'm going to take care of it because this is something that was given to me. This is a precious gift. So she takes it up to her room and she places it by her night table. Now, once she goes to bed, she's awakened in the middle of the night by this figure going around the hallway of the house up in the upstairs portion, basically painting flame X's on the doors of her brother and her parents' room. And this angel figure that kind of resembles this figure that she was given by the gardener's son meets her downstairs by the Christmas tree. And because she's in so much shock by being greeted by this angel, she passes out. And when she finally comes to, Missy is in Christmas morning by the tree, and her family's downstairs ready to open some presents. But her parents, while they're trying to, shift the gifts around, notice that the presents are gifted to other people that aren't in the family. And then it's made very clear what's happened to them when the gardener's family have come downstairs to celebrate Christmas in their own house. And it turns out that they've pretty much switched realities, where now the gardener's family lives in the house and are the rich folk. And essentially, Missy's family is trespassing there. And after a whole ordeal about the two fathers arguing about whose house it is, the police decide that the gardeners are actually the people that own the home, and that Missy's family needs to vacate the premises. And they're escorted off the premises with a vehicle. And they're pretty much chased to the streets, where they're forced to wander. And where they end up finding themselves on Christmas Day is essentially at a homeless people combine, where there's shanty, shacks where homeless people live in, and they really have nowhere else to go. They have no money. They have no credit cards. The dad's trying to figure out from the creditors and his friends and see what's going on. And he gets answers like, we don't know who you are. So obviously they realize that whatever they're in, it's not the reality that they're used to. So Missy sees a sign over in one of the shanty tents while they're there, while the brother's off trying to pretty much steal food from a food vendor. And she's greeted with the same angel that she saw the night before. And Missy's like, why are you doing this? I can understand that my family, doesn't have the Christmas spirit, but, they're good people. You got to trust in that. And the angel decides to give her like a $5 bill to be able to help her family afford to eat for the night. And they purchase food, and then they end up, scrounging whatever they can. By the night time, they have a barrel of fire, and they're trying to warm up, stay warm, before they have to go, lay down in one of the shanty shacks to go to bed. And Missy decides to take the remainder of the food and actually give it to the homeless. And the family reacts to it like, why are you giving away our only food? And Missy's like, well, look, we're normally well off. We've never been hungry or suffering in our lifetime, if only for a few minutes, because we're rich. We can afford it. So I thought we can give whatever we had left to people that actually need it, that have been suffering way longer than we have. And the family's like, oh, okay, whatever. And they go back into the shack to go to bed. But Missy, again, is greeted by the angel woman, who happens to be perched on the roof of the shanty shack. So she goes outside, and she's like, can we please go have everything how it should be? We haven't really done anything wrong. Please reconsider. We've suffered all day. Don't you think it's enough? And the angel decides to grant Missy's wish to her. So Missy ends up, going to bed. When she wakes up, she's back in her old home. Except this time, it seems that she might be a part of a new family, and you see this new relationship with a housemaid and some gardeners that might be associated with an old family kind of thing. And you get this, throughout the whole episode, you get this like narrator talking in an old Christmas fashion, and you get the moral of the story, let's just say, forced in there at the end to kind of send off what happened. And that's essentially Goodwill Towards Men's episode in a nutshell. So yeah, off the bat, I do have some positives with this episode. The leading girl who played Missy, I forget her name, but she's been in a lot of things I've seen over the years. She was great in this episode. I like her character and how she's kind of like the black sheep of her rich family, how she's willing to, do something kind for the workers that are, working on her family grounds. She thinks about them when her family doesn't. And she still tries to do something nice for them, even if her family scolds her for it. So that shows a lot of resiliency, and she's a genuinely good person. You get that sense throughout the episode, and she did a fantastic job conveying that. So yeah, Missy was a great character. The parents and the brother were pretty good actors. Their performances were believable with what the story was trying to go for, even though I think there was missed opportunities with their characters. Humongous ones at that. They are pretty well acted, and there's not really a bad performance to be seen from Missy's family. Even the side characters of the Gardener's family, very well done. This episode features a figurine angel and then a real life angel, and the way they transcended that with like the lighting work and the costumes and all that, it looked creepy and eerie at times, and you wouldn't think that, but when you see what this angel is able to do, especially when Missy first encounters her inside of her home, that scene was genuinely tense, and I like that. I thought that was pretty good for the episode, to have some actual horror in it, even though a lot of this episode is not really horror at all. But it was fine when it was fine, with that angel. And I do think at the heart of it, it's at least attempting a moral here, which I think it botches at the end, but I can give it a lot of commending for it, because, despite it being like a 22 minute episode with a time crunch, I do think that this episode could have benefited from a few more minutes to flesh out some characters and some of these morals, but at least attempting a moral there for the holidays is good. And I definitely see where Dan Angel and Billy Brown were trying to contrast with A Creature Was Stirring, because in that episode, it was about appreciating what you do have, not in your family and not in material things. In this episode, it's kind of a similar thing because the family's homeless again, kind of like A Creature Was Stirring. I don't know why Dan Angel and Billy Brown like making families homeless on Christmas, but you get the sense that the moral it's going for is you're supposed to give to others less fortunate than you, and that's the spirit of Christmas. That is like the religious side of the holiday. And this episode surprisingly plays a lot into religion. And if you're a religious person, we're getting into negatives. I can kind of see why you would have an issue with the context of the episode. And let's just put it up there. This angel, it's implied to be like a Christmas angel. So, there's some religious connotations with that. And the angels kind of overstepped a lot to be able to do what they're doing. And like I said, there's no context behind why they're doing it other than the angel feels themselves that this rich family needs to be taught a lesson. And that is a morally gray area in terms of religion. I don't really want to start unpacking all that. But that does kind of cloud, in my opinion, the point of having a religious thing in the episode. If you're going to do that, at least make it accurate. But yeah, that's one thing. The second negative I have with this story And it really comes down to the execution of the moral at the end of the day. What bothers me so much, especially when you have moral-driven stories like this, or like A Creature Was Stirring, at least with A Creature Was Stirring, you have like this Gremlins-esque thing going for it, where there's some mischief and there's some comedy to be had. Here, it's completely moral-driven, and the story, you think that the rich family's going to learn a lesson, right? But by the end of the episode, the characters that we got to know throughout majority of it feel like they were erased and made into new people by the angel's will by the end. So the people that we got to pretty much learn to hate and not like and want to see suffer don't actually learn a lesson. And that just defeats the purpose completely. If you strip away their richness and you make them homeless, the point is you want them to identify with the homeless, and you want them to start actually being good and decent people. This is why I think this episode could have benefited from a few extra minutes. Maybe it actually showcased the family going through helping the homeless, helping the needy. Make them realize that them being so standoffish with people beneath them was the wrong way of going, and especially in the holiday season, they should be more attentive to the homeless's needs and the people in needs. But no, you don't get any of that. The final act is completely rushed, and that's also kind of tied with this, but it's its own negative as well. The final act, you don't really, like I said, you don't feel the believability that this family has changed, other than Missy being the one good person throughout the whole episode, right? But because she gave a bag of food to one homeless person, that was enough for the plot to say, okay, now we're gonna have the angel, give Missy what she's saying that needs to be done, make things the way they have to be. And I feel like getting to that point was not earned. And that kind of feeds into the ending. The ending of it, y'all, the botched moral, y'all, essentially at the end of the day, is that the angel wanted the rich people to understand the sufferings of poor people. But the moral at the end of the day is that rich people deserve Christmas too. And I'm not kidding, because that's what the narrator says is the point of the story. Okay, well, there's a lot to unpack with that. And that mainly comes back to the poor people that the rich people were forced to live with. If that's the case, if this angel has all this divine power to change reality and mess with this rich family to teach them a lesson, why isn't the angel helping the homeless people? If that's the point, if you want them to see what the poor people go through, why don't you help the poor people instead of the rich people? I have no idea what, like I said, it's very sloppy, and I think the moral just gets very, very clouded by the end, because saying that rich people deserve Christmas too, you can tell that they already have Christmas. They have Christmas trees, they have presents, they can afford it. That defeats the purpose of what they went through. It's mind-boggling how they went with that. You can tell that they were trying to get some sense of closure for Missy. And if you're taking it in from the context that line was meant for Missy, saying that, oh, since Missy's a rich girl, she deserves to have a good Christmas because she's rich. Okay, that's fine. But that's not what the episode was doing. It included her whole family. If it was one thing with just Missy going through this and she needed to learn a personal lesson like an Uncle Scrooge, that's fine. But it didn't do that. So it just comes off like a big mess. In my opinion, this is what should have been the plot of the story. Instead of going through the whole beginning, Missy and her family are, doing some event downtown nearby, like the homeless shanty huts. And she gets gifted from a homeless person an angel. And this angel, she takes home and completely role reverses reality to now where the homeless people are now living in their home, and now she lives in the homeless shanty. And by doing that, it forces them way earlier on to get into the shanty. And then when they try to figure out where they are and who they are, they look on the news. They realize that they're in a reality where they aren't who they formerly were. And this forces them to hit a new low, and then they have to be good people and do things for the homeless community that they now live in. And then that can carry through to the end. And then if you still want to have the parents and the brother still have their lives swapped because they don't really learn the whole lesson, that's fine. You can do that. But you don't get that, organic buildup to what this story's trying to do. Because they didn't really set it up in the smartest way possible. And that's also the last negative I have with it, is the setup to the episode. It could have been way better. A lot of missed opportunities with that. So all in all, when it comes to Goodwill Towards Men, I don't think this is a great episode, but I definitely think it's a good episode to recommend, because at the end of the day, you still get those Christmas vibes. You get a nice protagonist out of this. I like the protagonist way more than I do A Creature with Stirrings protagonist. And honestly, it actually does something different here, which I can commend a lot more. And it makes me want to give this a higher rating than A Creature with Stirring. But how high, I knew it wasn't getting above a 4.5 out of 5. So it's going to be between a 4 to a 4.4. And where I settled with this was on the lower end, but I looked at all those issues that I said, and they kind of matched up with A Creature with Stirrings issues for me. It did kind of get in the way of getting to it, like the missed opportunities, the botched moral. The botched moral is really the biggest issue I have, and the concept setup itself and the lack of believability of the family. But Missy, being as good as she was, definitely carried it. So I'm willing to bump this up to maybe like a 4, at the highest, a 4.1 out of 5 stars. That sounds good. 4.1 out of 5 stars is what I'll give this episode. It's a B-, but it's definitely not as bad as I've heard people say it is. I know this is one of the more divisive Haunting Hour episodes out there in the community. I like this one. It does have its issues, but comparing its issues to some other episodes, this one, it does have its noticeable ones, but at least it does some things I look for in the show, like some setting changes, a good protagonist, at least some sort of swinging attempt at a full circle story. And in a lot of ways, I feel like the concept itself could have probably been drawn out into a 2-parter. So that's a testament to the concept. But like I said, they needed to put more attention into some areas to make that an all-time great episode from this show. And I just don't feel like this had it all there. But nonetheless, go check this episode out. I think it's a very good one on the lower end of it. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Goodwill Towards Men. Let me know down in the comment section if you've seen this episode before. Do you love this? Do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.